Please take your seats. The meeting is about to begin. Remember to speak into the microphone, as this meeting is being recorded for public record. Please stand by. We are going on air in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good afternoon and welcome to the June 10th, 2025 meeting of the Land Use and Sustainability Committee with 4 members. You're not a member. You're a visiting member today. But with 3 members of the committee present, I think we have quorum. Today's meeting of the Land Use and Sustainability Committee will be conducted in a hybrid format with members of the committee physically present in the Commission chambers at Miami Beach City Hall and staff and members of the public appearing either in person or virtually via Zoom. To participate virtually, members of the public may dial 888-475-4499 and enter the webinar ID, which is 8505-9923-037#, or log into the Zoom app and enter the webinar ID, which again is 8505-9923-037. Anyone wishing to speak on an item must click the raise hand icon in the Zoom app or dial *9 if participating by phone. With that, Mr. Director, are there any changes to our agenda as printed today?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe there's 2 items that are going to be deferred. The first is item 13, discuss updates to the Resiliency Code. And then the second is item number 23, which is discuss reclaiming the city's vision for the eastern gateway of Lincoln Road, the 100, 200, and 300 blocks.
Okay, so with that, is there a motion to set the agenda with a deferral of item number 13 and 23? And second by the chair, we can show that adopted by acclamation. The order of today's agenda is going to be items, I'm going to take out of order item number 19, 22, and 12. And then we're going to go with the rest of the agenda as printed. With that, Mr. Director, let's call item number 19.
Okay, item number 19 is a discussion of potential amendments to the land development regulations of the city code and the city comprehensive plan regarding allowable uses and development regulations within the 40th Street residential single-family overlay, only applicable to religious institutions.
Okay, so this is an item being sponsored by Mayor Stephen Minor. I've received a request from the Neighborhood Association to defer this item, but it is my understanding that this item is time sensitive. So who will be, Mr. Director, are you going to be introducing this item?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
All right, so please.
Okay. As the committee may recall, this item was referred last year on May 15th, and it was discussed one time at the September meeting. I'm sorry, at the June 10th meeting, wherein the committee requested that additional study of the proposal be made. And since then, the administration has met with Rabbi Stillerman and his architect, and the proposal has been modified. And I'll just briefly go through what the highlights of the proposal are. It would modify the 40th Street overlay, which is, if everybody's not familiar with this, the south side of 40th Street from Chase Avenue to Pine Tree Drive, that allows for the RS district to have religious institutions as part of the conditional use process. This particular ordinance would modify that overlay, so it would be very specific to that overlay, and these uses would still require conditional use approval. Additionally, the proposal would allow for the introduction of dormitory, not to exceed 4 dormitory units per platted lot, as well as standalone school as a main use. Additionally, the maximum lot aggregation has been increased from 2 lots to 3 lots, but design review board approval would be required for any sites containing 2 or more platted lots. The maximum lot unit size is proposed to be increased from 50% to 100%. The maximum lot coverage for a 2-story home is proposed to be increased from 30% to 50%. Covered stairs and walkways would be exempt from the unit size and lot coverage calculations. The minimum front setback has been reduced from 30 feet to 20 feet. That's for 2-story homes. The minimum street side setback has been reduced to 5 feet. And the maximum height has been increased from 2 stories to 3 stories, and from a height of 24 to 36 feet for slope roofs, and from 27 feet to 39 feet for flat roofs. Finally, the open space and extended setback requirements for homes exceeding 2 stories would be exempt from the overlay. This proposal would require a corresponding amendment to the comprehensive plan, and so if this is endorsed by the Land Use Committee and the City Commission considers a referral to the Planning Board, we would include a corresponding amendment to the comprehensive plan. In summary, should this move forward, a separate referral by the City Commission to the Planning Board would be required. Based upon the changes that have been made to the overlay, the administration is supportive of the proposed ordinance as drafted, and we would recommend that the Land Use Committee endorse the proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Just a few points of clarification. Under SB 1730, what does it speak about educational uses on religious property? Mr. Attorney.
I can speak to that. So SB 1730 is the amendment to the Live Local Act.
I'm sorry, yeah.
It would allow the city at our election to approve Live Local projects
I'm sorry,
on.
the other bill as it relates to educational uses on religious property.
Oh, there was a bill, I think it was last session or maybe the year before that, that preempted local governments as to authorizing properties owned by religious institutions to open schools.
Okay, so this is allowing a school as a main use, but this in essence just conforms with state law.
In a way, yeah, in a way, yes, it does. Yeah.
Okay, and then it introduces a limit of 4 rooms per unit, is that correct, Mr. Director?
4 dormitory units per platted lot.
Okay, and what is the size of a dormitory unit, just to understand?
We
Is it
don't.
like a traditional room?
Yeah, a dormitory is typically anywhere between 200 and 300 square feet, and they may or may not include a restroom.
Okay.
But that's what the typical size is.
And how does that compare, let's say the average home on a lot like this? How many rooms would an average home in a lot like this have?
With the allowable square footage under the code, most homes are typically up to 4 bedrooms, including as well as a kitchen and bathrooms and family room.
Okay, so this sets a limit of up to for these rooms per platted lot. So it's kind of contextual with what would be allowed otherwise generally with a single family home.
That's correct.
Okay. I know at one point there was discussions about rooftop activations. And I think a number of us felt very strongly about rooftop activations. Has this been eliminated from the ordinance?
In the overlay, there is no prohibition on rooftop activation, no.
There's no prohibition?
I don't believe so. Let me,
I would want to make sure that as this item moves forward, that if it moves forward, that we make it clear that there are this is a residential area, and we need to protect the character of this area. And we trust that the use will be a respectful use, but at the same point, we need to put the proper safeguards in place. And so I just want to make sure the ordinance that we have before us today does not have anything addressing rooftop uses?
yeah, the previous exceptions that were proposed for rooftop access and rooftop decks, those have been removed from the overlay. However, to your point, in an abundance of caution, it would probably make sense to add a specific provision regarding no rooftop access.
Okay, so that's an important clarification. A previous version of this ordinance had access to the roof. That language has been deleted, but I think this committee, if the item does move forward, we should move it forward with the recommendation of limiting rooftop access. Now, this ordinance, this amendment, can it apply to any property, or is it limited only to properties fronting the overlay that have the total aggregation of 3 lots?
It could apply to any property within the overlay. there's no requirement that you aggregate a minimum number of lots. So the regulations in the proposed overlay, the revised regulations would apply to any property in the overlay, regardless of how many lots they have aggregated.
Okay, because what I'm seeing here, it says development regulations for development consisting of 2 or more platted lots in the 40th Street overlay. And when I met with the interested party, it was indicated to me that this would only apply to those that have 2 or more platted lots. So I just want to make sure that this is as narrowly tailored to conform to the intent that was expressed to me. So I do want to avoid setting an unintended precedent.
I mean, we could add that for clarity, but as drafted, I don't see anything that would limit this to solely properties that aggregate 2 or more lots. But we could add that provision that
I
this.
would just make sure, just for clarity.
Okay.
All right, with that, I'll pass it along to my colleagues for comments.
I have a couple of questions. When you say dormitory, that means bedroom. It's not dormitory like with 4 bunk beds.
It's a bedroom. It could potentially have more than 1 bed. If that's something you wanted to further clarify, that's something that we could include as well.
Yeah, so my concern is, I'm all in favor of finding a happy solution, but my concern is this is a pretty significant upzoning for what is a residential neighborhood. And so I don't want it to become effectively a hotel where you've got 4 or 8 people per room. I'm not sure what the parking plan is. I know there are parking lots nearby, but still, is there gonna be like a checkout, a check-in period? What is the changeover going to be? Is it gonna be for people who stay for a weekend or a month or a year? Like, I think those are questions that I need to understand a little bit better.
Madam Vice Chair, but let me just suggest that anything that happens with this ordinance by virtue of being part of the overlay is a matter of a conditional use permit. Is that correct, Mr. Attorney?
That's correct.
And the questions that you are raising, while they are very good points, and I think there are points that do need to be addressed, those fall under the purview of the planning board at the time of a conditional use permit, because that relates more to an operational plan. Is that correct?
That's right.
Right, so,
yeah.
so, thank you. I understand that. I want to make sure that this is not structured so loosely that, what is well-intended in this instance with a good, thoughtful operator, should they decide to pick up and move to Fiji, and there's now this facility available, having somebody else come in who is not a good operator, because we're not thinking about this in the land use regulations. I want to make sure we're not opening ourselves up to something we can't roll back.
Is there a way to address some of those safeguards through the legislation, Mr. Chairman?
Sure, we could create a definition for dormitory, and we could include a maximum number of beds within a dormitory unit, if that was the direction of the committee.
I'm comfortable with that. I think it's better. Again, this is an overlay that is supposed to be a buffer between commercial zoning and residential zoning, and its intent is to preserve the residential character of the area while accommodating religious uses. And I think this is certainly an important religious use. And I think it's just good to have that safeguard. The ordinance, can certainly move forward, but I think, one of the recommendations, certainly in addition to limiting the rooftop activity, making sure that we have clearly defined what is a dormitory so that we don't end up with, a hotel or hostel use or some other type of transient use that might be non-conforming to the residential character of life and to non-conforming to the intent of the religious overlay itself. Right. Okay. With that, any other comments, questions from the dais? Are there members of the public wishing to speak on this item? If you're on Zoom, feel free to raise your hand on Zoom. If you're in person, feel free to approach the podium. Seeing none in person, none on Zoom, with the comments and the amendments proffered, is there? Okay, the item's been moved by Commissioner Suarez. I'll second the item. And what I would like to suggest is that as this moves forward, that the community be provided an opportunity just to forward any questions to the planning department, and that we make sure, I know this is a residents' right to know item, but let's just make sure that the neighborhood association, they've been very respectful throughout the process, and that they're provided the proper notice, so that they are aware of the legislation.
If I may, through the chair.
Yes.
I would suggest that there might have been a lapse here because they were not informed. It is a Residents' Right to Know Act, and the HOA did not get any information, so somehow that didn't work, and it needs to going forward.
All right, with that, we can show the item adopted. Next step is for there to be a referral. Commission for this to go to the planning board?
That's correct.
Okay, and that will be at the June meeting?
Probably July, because we have to amend the ordinance and then we have to draft the comp plan amendment. And the print deadline, the deadline for review by the manager has already passed. And so by the time we get that, it'll probably be the July meeting.
Okay, so for those member of the public who are watching or attending in person, the next step for this would be a referral to the planning board, and that referral will probably appear in the July commission meeting.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you so much. With that, we can call item number 22.
Okay, item number 22 is consider amendments to notice requirements in the land development regulations to facilitate rescheduling of land use board meetings in the event that a meeting is canceled due to a lack of quorum, and discuss amendments to land use board member attendance requirements.
Commissioner Suarez, Vice Mayor, welcome. This is
Call me Commissioner.
This is your item. You're welcome to introduce your item.
Thanks. I'll have Tom tee it up.
Okay?
22.
This is a proposal that would amend the land development regulations for two areas. The first would be to create a better set of operational standards for canceled or rescheduled meetings. Right now, whenever a land use board meeting is canceled or they don't get through the whole agenda, there's an understanding that an item is automatically moved, but this would codify that specifically for land use board meetings that are canceled or rescheduled after the agenda items have been noticed in accordance with the appropriate sections. All the items on the agenda of the canceled or rescheduled meeting shall automatically be placed on the agenda of the next land use board meeting. At least 5 days prior to the public hearing, a courtesy notice for the agenda items that were canceled or rescheduled shall be provided on a publicly accessible website. The second part of the proposal pertains to the removal of a land use board member. And right now, if a land use board member fails to attend 3 of the regularly scheduled meetings per calendar year, they are automatically removed from the board. The sponsor has proposed to reduce this to 2 regularly scheduled meetings. This part of the proposal is not recommended by the administration because this could result in gaps in board members, particularly since it can sometimes take a couple of months for board members to get reappointed by the commission. And so the administration's recommendation is to move forward with the rescheduled meetings section, but not to move forward with reducing the number of permitted absences from 3 to 2.
Also, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but we also have an alternate member?
We had talked about establishing an alternate member, but we do not have an alternate member currently.
Okay. So, a lot of this is a result of the DRB. They have missed quorum, I think, last year many times. And that has resulted in a lot of heartbreak for some of the businesses and homeowners who rely on the DRB for approval processes. And I'd like to speed up the process and make sure that it's a little bit more that it's sustainable for business owners and residents to rely on the board actually meeting for quorum. I understand there's some DRB members who missed more than 3 and are still somehow on the board. And I want to make sure that whoever we put on these boards have are committed to attending. I think since I've brought this idea forward, the board has changed. I think there's a few different members on now, and attendance has been 100%. So I'm okay with not moving forward on the second part. The alternate member, and I wanted to see what my colleagues think about this, where if there is a situation where a board member is not going to be able to make it, and there is an alternate that could be called on, I don't know how my colleagues would feel about that.
I think, from my perspective, members serve in seats oftentimes that are specific to a trade, whether it be an attorney. In the BOA, we have accountants, we have planners. At one point, we had water quality experts on certain boards, where they're not just a person that is sitting there and voting, but they're a person with a subject matter expertise. And if that individual is going to be absent and is going to cause a quorum issue, having an alternate member might not necessarily do justice to the substance that the member that's going to be absent, brings.
Well, we could have an alternate for that seat. I understand that might be a little bit much, but
It's a bit much, I think. I think so. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend that. That's just my thought about it. And imagine there was boards. You have a real estate expert on the planning board. You have what are some of the other categories we have on the planning board?
You have general business, you have engineering, you have real estate, you have historic preservation, urban design.
Yeah.
There's a number of different categories.
And so you would have to have experts on each one of those, as it is hard to fill the vacancies that we have with quality in individuals. I mean, for us, it's great because it's another seat to appoint to, and there's always individuals who want to serve on these boards, and we have, always people that want to serve on them, but do they have the specific expertise to fill a specific seat?
well, that's what the alternate would be. That's okay. I mean,
Yeah,
maybe we're not there yet.
I don't think so. Yeah.
That's fine. So I'd like to move forward with the part A, and withdraw part B for this item. I'd like
Are
to
there
make
any
a
other comments from the dais on this item? All right.
I'd like to move the item.
I'll second the item. Are there members of the public wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none in person, seeing none in Zoom, we can show the item adopted by acclamation. With that, Mr. Director, out of respect to our colleague, Commissioner Magazine, he has item number 9 on the agenda. He's joining us today, so I'd like to go ahead and call that item.
Okay, let me just pull that out. This is item 9, discuss setting parameters for property owners to present creative development proposals to the city administration and city commission as an alternative to invoking the preemptions in the Live Local Act to encourage long-term, non-transient residential development, including workforce housing that is more compatible with the surrounding neighborhood.
Commissioner Magazine, you're welcome to introduce your item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And full disclosure, when I thought of this item, it was before the new iteration of the Live Local Act. And I've been tossing back and forth in my head if something like this is more needed and applicable now, or has to be totally rethought and revamped. Where I was going with this is we all recognize the need to facilitate housing, long-term residential housing. It's something that we've all heard from our residents. As we look at affordability, there's simply no other way to help very pressured populace, with housing being one of the number one leading attributions to lack of affordability. And the best way to do that is increasing supply. And Tallahassee essentially took a lot of those decisions out of our hands. And this was essentially looking to create an alternative that would be more in scale with our city. And let me use an example. Linking back to the previous iteration of Live Local. If we were preempted as a city, and let's say along Alton Road, for example, a Live Local project would have been able to be built up to 200 feet or 175 feet. We could set some sort of parameters in conjunction with city staff and say, you know what, while we recognize the need to facilitate residential housing, 200-foot building on Alton Road is just out of scale and out of character with our neighborhood. There's no place for that in Miami Beach. But let's work with the project sponsor and come up with something more in scale for our neighborhood. The requirements for Live Local would be 60% market rate, 40% workforce housing. So, even very simplistically, a quick calculation, you could say, okay, if a developer has the ability to build 200 feet under Live Local, let's look at just granting him the ability to do 60% of that of all market rate. And while perhaps the workforce housing apartments wouldn't be included, the number one driver of price points in our city is going to be location, and these wouldn't be waterfront apartments and apartments that would be built on Alton Road or Washington Avenue or even Lincoln Road. They would be at a more price accessible and affordable point. So it would be a way to essentially facilitate a process where yes, we had Live Local jammed down our throats, but we would do something more in character, more in scale with our city instead of losing it altogether. However, a huge wrench was thrown into that as the current iteration of Live Local has been passed. And when I opened up and said, I don't know if a measure like this is more needed or is not even feasible right now, is because the area that I've highlighted along Alton Road, right now under the Live Local, and Tom, please correct me if I'm wrong, a developer would be able to build 519 feet, right? And we have this kind of misnomer that, well, these projects aren't financially feasible. If a developer already owns land at a very low cost basis, and there's a developer in our city that has submitted many applications that his land cost is very low because his family has owned them for a long time, these projects are financially feasible, right? If you look at the rents that you're able to obtain under Live Local, for a studio bedroom, I think it's approaching $2,500 or $2,600, and for a 3-bedroom, you're looking upwards of almost $3,500 or $3,900 under the new Fannie and Freddie guidelines. And those are the ones that are essentially being subsidized. And if you're able to build 519 feet under market rate and then just break even on the Live Local portion, that is very profitable. And I think we'd be remiss to say we're not going to see any of these projects because they're not financially feasible. So, Tom, I'll kick it over to your staff and kind of let the committee talk about this. It's a thought. I don't know if we move on this or we just kind of ask city staff to evaluate what potential alternatives would be. But this is going to be an incredible burden on our city. We could talk about other mitigants for this, but this is one thing where it's trying to thread the needle where if we do lose the battle and these projects are kind of coming down the pike, a way to soften that blow.
One of the things that we had looked at as part of this item is what other options would be available to the commission should they wanted to exercise some latitude, like, for instance, as an alternative to a Live Local project. A couple of options that we came up with were, one, the commission could establish a waiver provision with regard to certain types of elements like building height, parking. The other thing that they could establish would be a warrant process as it relates to FAR. And these would be done on a property by property, case by case basis, depending upon what the elements of the project are, whether or not, for instance, they're willing to agree by covenant that all of the residential units will be non-transient in perpetuity, that they will be geared toward the type of housing that we're looking for, whether it be attainable housing or whether it be a certain percentage of workforce housing or affordable housing. But that would allow the commission to look at options like that on a case-by-case basis. The one thing we wouldn't recommend at this time would be to amend certain sections of the code to increase building height in FAR in response to what may or may not be a live local project in the future, because we just don't know which ones would be viable. It could be that at some point in the future, if we see a large number of live local projects concentrated within a certain area of the city, it may make sense to fine tune the zoning regulations so that you could still achieve the goal of getting more attainable type housing without the burden of having to adhere to the more stricter requirements for workforce or affordable housing. But at this time, that's not a broad code amendment that we would recommend.
Let me just ask a question. Because part of the concern with Live Local, of course, as has been well described by Commissioner Magazine, is the fact, okay, along Alton Road, we could end up with these very tall buildings. However, while they have the right to submit an application, and they have the right to invoke Live Local, does that right yield an approval, or do they need to meet other criteria in order to get their development approved?
So if what it's going to hinge on is whether there's available infrastructure capacity on that particular site. So and this applies primarily to water and sewer. So if there is not available infrastructure, what the Live Local Act says is you're entitled to administrative approval if your project complies with the Live Local Act and otherwise complies with the comprehensive plan. That last part, otherwise complies with the comprehensive plan, means that there has to be available infrastructure. If there isn't, then
we can negotiate with the property owner to a size that is more appropriate, that would meet the capacity that our city's infrastructure is able to handle.
what we can do is that at that point they would not be entitled to administrative approval, so they would have to go through the regular development review board process.
Right. And that's where then we would be able to negotiate with a property owner.
Right, staff will give them, rounds of feedback and comments, and they'll have to respond to those comments.
Commissioner Suarez.
But the way I see it is if they don't meet those requirements, then their Live Local project is not possible, correct? And why do we need to negotiate if it's not possible?
Well, because at that point, what it says is that you are entitled to the Live Local. What it does is a matter of procedure. It gives property rights, but it also changes procedure. And correct me, Mr. Attorney, if I'm wrong, but if you don't meet the capacity infrastructure, then you no longer apply for an administrative approval. The city can subject you now to a different process. Is that a correct understanding of the law?
Right, but if they can't meet the requirements for the comprehensive plan as it relates to infrastructure, then what's there to negotiate anyways?
Well, you can negotiate a more moderately designed building that might be able to meet the capacity of the available infrastructure.
And it's not a negotiation, it's not a transaction. It's not a transaction like we would engage in for city property. But rather it's the normal development review process where you're submitting a board application and staff provides.
Right, and what I'm saying is if they can't meet, if a developer can't meet or an applicant can't meet the requirements for the comprehensive plan, and they want, okay, well, they can't.
Right.
So why would we entertain a negotiation if they can't, at the the very first step, they can't even apply for this
That's a
property.
very good point. I see the city attorney wants to say
Yeah.
something else, and then Commissioner Bott.
So generally, an applicant has the option of either paying mitigation or making the required improvement. So they would still have those options.
Oh, okay. So if they, if there's a site and they cannot, as it stands, cannot meet the infrastructure, for example, if they need to put in a lift station, right, a pump, they would do that and then they would be approved?
We would, well, first of all, so they would be subject to the regular board review process, so they couldn't be approved administratively. And then prior to the issuance of a building permit, they would either have to make the required improvements or pay mitigation.
But why would they be subject to a board approval process?
Because what the Live Local Act says is that you're entitled to administrative approval if you satisfy the requirements of the act and you otherwise satisfy the requirements of the local comp plan. And that it's the comp plan is
And if
our
you don't,
hook.
and if you don't satisfy the comp plan, then what happens?
Then you don't get you're not entitled to administrative approval.
Okay, then what happens?
Well, they're still going to invoke, developers still going to invoke the other provisions of the Live Local Act, but at least at that point, they'll go through the back and forth that is part of the development board review process.
So the applicant would have to make amends to comply with the comprehensive plan, infrastructure.
They would have to comply with the comp plan, yes.
And that requires board approval process?
No, what it is that Live Local says if your project complies with the comp plan, is consistent with the comp plan, that you're entitled to administrative approval.
Right.
What we're saying is if the project would not be consistent with the adopted levels of service that we have in our comp plan, then you don't get administrative approval. You can still invoke the preemptions in the Live Local Act, but you would be subject to the normal back and forth process of going before the DRB or the HPB.
But not a commission approval?
No.
And that's where,
So that's where the negotiation happens, is what you're suggesting?
yeah, through the normal land review process, because even, okay, let's say they come in and they say, okay, we're willing to put a pump station, it's no longer an administrative approval, and we're now able to go back before the land development process, is that correct, Nick, with our public hearings and this public process?
Right.
And we're not necessarily forced to approve 500-foot building, we can work with the developer and find a medium.
We'll have to look at, each project will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis, but a
case-by-case
developer can still invoke preemptions in the
Right,
Live Local
so
Act.
I just want to walk this through, hypothetically. Submits an application, invokes Live Local preemptions, however, needs to meet certain criteria for the comp plan as it relates to infrastructure. And we want to negotiate with the developer to bring down a lower height, for example. If that's the case, if the negotiation part, does that require a commission approval? Would we have to actually vote on that, or what Commissioner Fernandez is suggesting is just amending the process for which they would have to comply with the comprehensive plan?
I would say that it's what it's going to look more like is that the applicant will submit design to the planning department, and that planning will give them feedback based on the review criteria that apply for the boards. I want to be sensitive with the word negotiation, because again, these are not transactional matters. There's still going to be a regulatory development approval process. While we may have some leeway as far as the design of a project or overall massing of a project, a developer can still invoke the preemptions in the Live Local Act. So we're going to be reviewing these on an individual project, case-by-case basis.
So Commissioner Magazine, I don't know if you wanted to chime in.
Yeah, so just to further some of those points, what would be covered under the comprehensive plan? So let's continue using this as an example of Alton Road. A 500-foot application is submitted. What would we look at to see if it complies with the comprehensive plan.
It's a Tom question.
It's gonna be, it is a Tom question. It's gonna depend, and I don't think it's on the height specifically. It's gonna depend on the impact of that project, which is either based on number of units or square footage, but Tom could probably speak to that better.
Yeah, I
than me.
think, Commissioner, the easiest way to answer it would be this. The impacts on infrastructure have nothing to do with the overall height. So somebody could come in with a 500, 400-foot building, and that's not going to have any bearing on the infrastructure. What does have a bearing on the infrastructure is the intensity. And under the Live Local Act, currently, you can have an intensity of up to 6.375. So if somebody on Alton Road wanted to do an FAR of 6.375, regardless of the height that they choose, they could propose that. Now, depending upon the total square footage proposed, the total number of units proposed, then our Public Works Department would do a very detailed analysis of the need for potable water, the availability of potable water, water pressure, and the ability to be able to accommodate both stormwater runoff as well as accommodate requirements for sewer. If it was determined that the intensity proposed could not be accommodated with our current infrastructure, we would make a finding of inconsistency with the comprehensive plan. They would then have to go to public hearing. In terms of quote-unquote negotiations,
Which public hearing?
if they're in an historic district, it would be the
Got it.
HPD.
Okay.
Outside, they would go to DRB.
It'd be a land use board.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, the land use board could then offer guidance and feedback, since they have to now approve it, regarding the architecture, regarding the distribution of volume. But as Nick said,
But what does a land use, excuse me, but what does a land use board have to do with approving potable water?
well, that's the other part. The actual infrastructure would have to be determined by Public Works. And if it was determined that there was just no way to mitigate what they were proposing, or what was needed for mitigation ended up being cost prohibitive for the developer, then the developer would have to look at reducing the intensity, reducing the number of units to something that could either be mitigated or could potentially be accommodated by available infrastructure. And these are the things that at this point we don't know, because we have yet to take an application through that entire process.
And I'm assuming that the more of these projects get built, the less and less, or the more strain on infrastructure there is, right?
That's the case outside Live Local Act. So even if somebody is proposing a new project as of right, under current regulations, they still have to go through a very rigorous review of the impacts of their infrastructure. And we've actually had as of right projects delayed in terms of permitting because of their inability to meet those requirements, and the requirement that they make certain improvements to the public infrastructure to deal with
And
that.
in fact, us ourselves, as we're looking at certain zoning to create more housing availability in our city, both on Lincoln Road and Washington Avenue, that's something that we're contemplating. What is the capacity of the existing infrastructure? And if we create this zoning, what is the additional need for infrastructure improvements, so that we can better contemplate that in the legislating process?
And so, Tom, if Public Works determines that it's inconsistent and we cannot meet that demand, again, they cannot move forward with their Live Local plan unless they bring down their intensity?
There would be a couple of things they could do. They could reduce the level of intensity to meet what is currently available in terms of capacity, or they could potentially make certain public improvements to increase that capacity. But if they could not, if there were just no public improvements that could be made, or the public improvements were just cost prohibitive, then they wouldn't have a choice. They would have to reduce the capacity.
And I just want
or
us
the
to remember,
intensity.
this bill still has not been signed by the governor, and we're still actively lobbying in an interest to try to get this bill vetoed. So these latest amendments of SB 1730 and the expansion of the Live Local Act, I mean, we're just assuming, should they be signed, but we are still actively, because of these great concerns to our infrastructure. I have also a significant concern about the added intensity, the added density, and the impacts that that's going to already have on already failing emergency routes, on infrastructure that we don't own. These are state-owned assets that are our emergency routes that are already failing. And that's some of the concerns that, we're passing along to the state.
Commissioner, the chair brings up a good point as far as traffic. Is traffic at all considered in the comprehensive plan?
Yes, and we do a traffic evaluation as part of every development project. The problem is under state law, we can't deny a project because they don't meet traffic concurrency. We can require certain forms of mitigation, particularly at that property and potentially within adjacent intersections. But under state law, we can't deny a project based upon that project generating more traffic, which contributes to failing roadways or failing intersections.
And Tom, I know you'll say impossible to judge a hypothetical here, but still try for it. Do you feel as if this is an adequate safeguard, or using that same example, if there is a 450 foot project proposed on Alton Road of 6.0 FAR, are they going to be able to squeeze in under the comprehensive plan, or is that going to be a safeguard that we can essentially rely on?
Up until now, it's been a safeguard for larger projects that were as of right. So I think if you start to see multiple live local projects that are at that type of FAR number, yeah, I think that our comprehensive plan will.
And to your point, one of the greater concern is the precedent set by Five Park. Five Park itself, when it was constructed, that needed its own lift station because it wasn't able, the existing infrastructure wasn't able to handle the capacity needs. And so even that had to go back, and they had to make improvements to the infrastructure. So anyone who tries to tap into that height, it's likely, I mean, we can't say for sure because these are all analyzed on a case-by-case basis. But if Five Park, needed that lift station and all that, it's likely that other projects probably will.
Yeah, that's correct. The city basically is not going to approve or permit a project that's going to result in a degradation of things like water pressure or cause sewer backup or result in fire hydrants not having enough pressure. Those are certain threshold things that get to basic life safety. And unless the developer can make infrastructure changes to fully address that, like they did at Five Park, the project won't be able to move forward.
Commissioner Magazine, what direction would you like to take this item on? I know that this item
Yep.
is important to you, and you've been thinking about this for a long time.
So I think where we can head with this is pausing any type of legislation. However, really asking staff or urging staff to sharpen your pencils, because it's going to be wait and see, and then when we're forced to accept a local project in some way, then it's going to get real, right? And we can't just be in brainstorming mode at that point. We're going to have to move urgently and have some sort of outline or basis in our head, because once these plans get baked, right? We saw it in North Beach where we said, "Oh, okay, you have a 200-foot building. Please make that residential. What would you need?" No, sorry, those plans are already done. So if a developer already comes in and they've already spent a couple $1 million on coming up with some of these plans, we're kind of past the point of negotiation. So it's a bit of a chicken and the egg. So I'm fine to just kind of pause on this. I hope it doesn't come back to bite us, and I understand our apprehension of trying to negotiate something more accommodative until one of these projects actually comes to fruition.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Magazine, Commissioner Suarez, and then we're going to move on.
Yeah, well, I don't know if Rodney from Public Works wants to come up here. So the question is, we don't know if a project like that can can be approved on Alton Road or any place in Miami Beach. Is it possible for Public Works to do an analysis of what is the threshold for an intense or an application that has a certain intensity of, what was it, Tom, 6.3, 6.75?
Max FAR that could be proposed would be 6.375.
6.3, so that's close. So I'd like to see if staff can come up with, at least maybe for Alton, since we've been talking about Alton, South of Fifth. We're already doing one for Washington Avenue and Lincoln Road, but maybe a couple of more corridors in North Beach, where if there was a live local application to a certain height, so we know that a 1 mile or a 3/4 mile radius from Five Park is 520 feet, and it has an FAR of 6.375. Can that be done?
Good afternoon, Rodney Knowles, Assistant Director for the Public Works Department. Yes, we could definitely look at that to see if we can establish what that threshold is and what these parameters are so that we're able to provide that information, which will guide a lot of these decisions. I think it's reasonable.
And yeah, that would give us, if you come back to the next meeting, or if you need a couple of meetings to come back and give us that analysis, so that when there is an application that comes in, we kind of know where they are, the developer. And so I think that gives us a little bit more an understanding of what we can work with, and as well as the applicant.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Do you want to continue the item to the September 11th land use so that we
I'll
could
let
put
the
together?
chair decide. I think that's a great idea to get that analysis back, whether you want to keep it here or whether you want to clear the agenda, I'm fine with.
I think, listen, I think that this is a good discussion to be had. We still need to see what happens with the bill. It'd be great to get that analysis from Public Works, and I think we should give some more thought to, in fact, some of the policy recommendations included in this memo as it relates to some of the waivers to try to create a more attractive process. I know we're also working on the Live Better survey that hopefully will be teaming up, hopefully with FIU. I think it is, Kara. Is it FIU? FIU to do a survey of the housing needs of our workforce and what that is, so that we can incorporate that into policy. So let's keep this September.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Magazine.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. With that, Mr. Director, let's call item number 12.
Okay, Mr. Chair, item number 12 is require applicants for zoning incentives to be in good standing with the city prior to filing a completed application, including resolving all open code violations, paying all outstanding fines, fees, or other bills to the city, and prohibiting habitual offenders with a pattern of code violations during the preceding few years from applying under certain circumstances.
All right, so this is an item I placed on the agenda. This because we deal with a lot of incentives to create housing, and individuals come to us seeking zoning relief. What I don't want is for individuals who are bad property owners to be benefiting from incentives when they're not being responsible in their maintenance of their property. So this ordinance amends the requirements for private applications to our LDRs to require no open zoning code, building, or life safety violations at a property that would benefit from these amendments to the LDRs. No outstanding fines, no outstanding fees, or other open bills to the city. And in addition to that, if someone has had more than 3 violations of these types of property violations, where they are denigrating the quality of life of an area, where they're constantly violating the code, where they are constantly just deteriorating their property, that they have a 1-year waiting period before they be able to benefit from any of these zoning incentives. What I don't want to encourage property owners to purposefully let their building and their property get in bad conditions, abandon their property, accumulate code violations, not clean their property, keep their property empty, keep their property in unsafe, unsanitary, unsightly, blighted conditions to then force our hand into zoning changes to improve the area. No. If you're gonna come and seek zoning changes from the city, it's because you are a property owner that is in good standing with the city, someone who maintains their property and deserves for our city to have the consideration of granting you zoning rights that you don't have today. But all of that starts with you being a responsible property owner, with you being a good neighbor, with you keeping your property clean, with you abiding with the zoning laws of this city, with the code, with the life safety laws of the city, of you not endangering the people who walk by your property. And so I'm gonna pass it along, Mr. Attorney, so you can further describe this ordinance or explain anything else I may have not touched upon.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to. So, you covered the main points, which is that an applicant seeking zoning incentives can't have any open violations, can't, at that time, owe the city any money. If the developer is deemed to be a habitual offender, meaning they have 3 or more violations within the preceding 3 years, then they have to sit out for 1 year before their amendment can be considered. This does provide for a waiver by resolution of the city commission based on a number of factors which we've drafted, whether the applicant was the owner of the property at the time of the violations, any efforts that the applicant has taken to mitigate the conditions that gave rise to the violations in the first place, and any other pertinent information that the city commission considers warrants granting a waiver. But otherwise, this would apply very broadly to anybody who is seeking an amendment to the LDRs.
And I just think that this is so important. I think of, for example, Lincoln Road. On Lincoln Road, or even Washington Avenue, I think perhaps Washington Avenue is a much better example, where we're looking at important zoning legislation. The zoning legislation that's going to increase, and it applies to both Lincoln Road and Washington Avenue and other parts of the city. Zoning legislation that will directly or indirectly increase the value of property. But I want to make sure that those people that are going to benefit from that zoning are not the same people who are attracting the crime, who are maintaining their properties, who are bringing down the quality of life of the area. The people who are making it at times dangerous for people to walk around some of these areas. If you want to benefit from zoning, be a responsible property owner and start by being a good neighbor. With that, Commissioner Bott had her hand up first, and then Vice Mayor Suarez.
So I love the intent of this, and my question is, what happens when you have somebody who has sat on a property and engaged in demolition by neglect, or is trying to? For them, a year is just the cost of doing business. They've sat on it for 15 years, leaving it vacant. And what's another year? So how do we strengthen that piece so that we can get exactly what you're going after here?
Well, a violation for demolition by neglect would be the type of violation that could qualify you as an habitual offender. Typically, once someone is ready to move forward, the first thing they're seeking is an application to amend the code. So it's at exactly that moment that we think that the 1 year waiting period would really have the greatest effect.
But my point is, a 1 year waiting period, if they've already been, a lousy owner for so many years, is a 1 year waiting period sufficient, or is it just, another year out of 10? I mean, is there anything else we can do to add teeth to this, to make this?
I got an idea, if you don't mind. Can we, all the properties owned by that individual? Meaning, if he's marked as he or she is marked as a habitual offender, any properties that this person owns has to wait a year.
I like the way my colleagues think.
That's a question that the sponsor has also asked. We would recommend that, first of all, this is really groundbreaking legislation as it is, and we would recommend that it be limited to the property that is the subject of the application. The reasons for this penalty are at their core property specific, are repeated violations on that property, violations that relate to the building code, life safety code, property maintenance, demolition by neglect.
Can we require an extra fee? So, for example, depending on how many, let's say it's 3, but let's say they have 7. A year, in my opinion, as Commissioner Bott stated, I don't think that's enough, right? Or maybe after 3, for an additional 3, it's another year.
On the waiting period, I would not go longer than 1 year. There is, and I can brief you individually on this, but I think that 1 year is really the maximum for a waiting period like this. There are other issues under state law that I want to avoid.
And I think also when we look, is, the attorneys, they were guiding me on penalties and financial penalties. But the one thing is, when you say 1 year, that is so much greater than any financial penalty, the holding cost of the property for a year, than not being able to file an application and start that process for a year. And that's what we're saying. Because sometimes people file an application and then they're, a year going through that process of doing the signs. And this is saying, a 1 year waiting period before the amendment can be filed. Is that correct, Mr. Attorney?
That's right.
Okay.
And,
So
does this trouble to just the property or the owner?
now I'm going to defer to the city attorney.
The property. I would recommend the property.
So what if they just sell the property to an LLC out of Delaware and we don't know who the owner is?
This would it would still apply to a new owner.
I just want to correct myself, is because and again, you've guided me so well, Nick, on this. It's not, we can't prohibit someone from filing an application, but it's consideration before the planning board. It cannot be considered before the planning board.
Correct.
For a year,
That's right.
right? And which is, so, I think we, as the city attorney mentioned, we are being very groundbreaking. And I would love for us to put extra teeth. I just get concerned if we put too many teeth, the unintended consequence of that. Mr. Attorney, as it relates to the predatory solicitation on our ordinance relating to the predatory buyout of condos, those predatory practices, how would this apply to that?
So violations of your 2 ordinances, which are pending before the city commission for second reading on June 25th, those would be the kinds of violations that could make somebody an habitual offender.
So if there is a developer out there that is preying on condo owners that are aggressively soliciting them, engaging in unfair predatory tactics, then the greatest penalty that we will have is, in fact, making them hold on to the property for a year and delaying their ability to move forward with an application.
Right.
All right?
Can I also think of the Deauville site, right? And what we lose sight of the fact is that when the property sits vacant, the surrounding property also suffers. Could we require them to make, in addition to the year, make certain enhancements to the property? Where I know we have right now, it has to be in a park-like appearance, but can we raise the standard of that so that it's not in the bare minimum of just hydro seed that is going to just brown out after a week?
I think if you want to look at the requirements that apply to vacant properties, I think we could do that as part of separate legislation. I know the commission has amended that section a few times over the years.
Yeah.
And if you want to look at strengthening the landscape requirements, we can talk.
Okay.
Going back to the DeVille situation, because I know one of the things that we hear from the DeVille and other properties is, okay, you want to penalize the property owner. Sometimes you have situations where the property sitting idle penalizes the neighbors more than what it penalizes the property owner. Do we put any safeguard in place in the event, let's say you really do have something that you do need to move quickly on to not hurt? Are there any waivers, any safeguards that we put into this?
We did include a waiver provision. It would be at the request of the applicant. It could only be granted by resolution of the city commission, and it would be based on, we drafted 3 factors. 1 is whether the applicant was the owner at the time. 2 is whether the applicant has taken any efforts to mitigate the conditions that gave rise to those violations in the first place. And 3rd is any other information that would be relevant to the commission's, so the commission could waive the waiting period.
Because at times you might have a good property owner that inherits the problems of someone else.
Correct.
But could we make that a 5/7 waiver?
Again, this is new. What we're doing here is really brand new. So I would start with a majority vote, and could you make it a 5/7? Absolutely, that's a matter of policy. But my recommendation would be since this is a new penalty, that you may want to try it out and then revisit it and make amendments. But it's your call.
All right, I'll follow your guidance.
I'll go stronger first.
You go stronger first?
I'd like to go stronger as well.
All right, well, the majority rules. So, we will go stronger first.
5/7.
5/7. And I think it's just aligned.
Want
It's
to go
very,
6/7, Tanya?
Are there members of the public wishing to speak on this item? I see that the Inspector General is in the audience. Are you here on this item, Mr. Santorino? Several. Okay, all right. I want to thank you for your guidance as it related to the condominium buyout ordinance to stop those predatory practices. I'm very pleased with the guidance of your office and with the work of the City Attorney's Office that we'll be considering at the June 25th City Commission meeting, and then hopefully this item that will be a part of that to ensure that we have the proper teeth in place. With that, seeing no members of the public in person wishing to speak on this item and none on Zoom, can we show the item adopted by acclamation? All right. This would go to which commission meeting next?
We would draft an ordinance for the July City Commission meeting for referral to the Planning Board.
All right. Commissioner Bott, you have item number 2. Before we take item number 1, it seems like item number 2 is an important discussion as it relates to traffic, and traffic is always in our minds. And let's let the director introduce the item.
Okay, Mr. Chair, this is item number 2. Discuss replacing the drawbridge at 63rd Street with a flyover to alleviate traffic congestion.
Okay, so this is a heavy lift. It's not going to be resolved today, one way or the other. We have tried a number of times in different ways over the years to try to make this drawbridge less of an impediment for the flow of traffic in the city. We had all kinds of ideas that we have suggested to the Coast Guard, who maintains jurisdiction over this drawbridge and the right-of-way on the water, and we've been shut down at every turn. So there are 2 choices. You can either accept status quo, or you can try to think about something new and different. And I prefer to proceed with the latter route. And so I would like to move forward with evaluations of what kinds of things are available to us to review and discuss and assess. We are not the only municipality in the world that has this issue, and we have the opportunity to create something that is novel, groundbreaking, beautiful, complicated, probably expensive, and certainly difficult. But that's never stopped us, and so I would like to move forward with this. I'll turn it over to our esteemed Director of Transportation and his colleagues to show us the way forward.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, committee members. So as Commissioner Bott pointed out, The 63rd Street Bridge is not under our jurisdiction. It's under the State of Florida Department of Transportation. And the regulations regarding the opening of the bridge are under the Coast Guard's purview. And we've been working with them for a while, trying to persuade them that opening the bridge on an hourly basis would reduce some of the traffic congestion that's created as a result of the frequent bridge openings. Currently, every half hour. The bridge opens every half hour, more or less. So we were advocating for hourly openings. We conducted a traffic study, a traffic analysis, shared that with them that showed that openings once an hour would create less congestion, which they did not disagree with. However, they felt that that would present too much of a challenge for marine traffic. So yes, vehicular traffic would indeed get better, but marine traffic would be affected. So they actually, the Coast Guard countered with another option that we're currently evaluating. There is some benefit to the option that they are proffering, which basically what it does is it takes the bridge off of the on-demand schedule. On-demand means the bridge tender is required to open the bridge whenever a vessel signals the bridge tender to open the bridge. So currently, the bridge is on demand weekdays and weekends from 7 p.m., about 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. the next day. And so by taking the bridge off demand, we believe that there will be some benefit to traffic flow. Not as much as the weekday hourly openings that we were recommending and proposing, but at least it's a step in the right direction. But those conversations are happening in parallel. What this item really is about is to conduct a feasibility study.
Jose, before you get into that, and by the way, I love this item. Was there maybe discussion to limit the bridge opening once an hour during rush hour? Perhaps maybe meet them in the middle, like, during rush hour, only open it on the hour.
So during rush hour, there's actually restrictions in place from approximately 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. and approximately 4 p.m.
What are the
to
restrictions?
7 p.m. The bridge will not open to regular marine traffic. It will only open for emergency vessels and tugs and tows.
Okay,
That
so it's
is
not
the
even
Coast
opening
Guard
between
policy.
7 and 10, and
That's
then
right.
4 and 7?
Yep.
Yes,
Okay.
from about 4 to 7. But then after 7 p.m.
It's on demand.
It's on demand. And then that also creates, even on weekends and weekdays, it creates some congestion.
So when does it open every 30 minutes then? Or is it only on demand for now?
I'm sorry?
So I was under the impression that it opens up every 30 minutes.
It does
Between 10 a.m. and 4
between
p.m.
10 a.m., approximately 10 a.m. and approximately 4 p.m.
And after 7 p.m., it's on demand.
On demand, correct.
Okay, so let's get onto the flyover. I'm more interested in the flyover.
All right, so what this item entails is a high-level feasibility study, which would be required by the DOT for us to conduct. And the study would look at two options. One option would be to elevate the bridge, meaning just reconstructing the bridge at a higher level. It would still be a bascule bridge, a drawbridge, but if it's constructed at a higher level, and thereby creating more clearance between the sea level and the bottom of the bridge, it would reduce the number of vessels that would require the bridge to open in the first place. So that's the thought process behind that option. And the second option would be to replace the drawbridge with a flyover, with a permanent high-level flyover. Both options are, shall we say, complex. They're not easy, but that's why I think the first step should be a feasibility study to look at if there's any fatal flaw, and more or less to have an idea of the impacts that each alternative would have on the surrounding environment, and the cost.
Through the
And
chair.
so,
Well, wait, I just want to know, if we wanted to say, we don't want a drawbridge anymore, and we just want a fixed, we just want to, put a key in it and never open it again, is that something that the city can do? Or since this is owned by the state?
No, sir.
But USCG would have to.
Okay.
can say
So we
whatever.
can't, meaning, let's say we did build it at a little higher elevation, but we said, we don't want to make it a drawbridge anymore. We want to say, it's no longer a drawbridge, we're going to extend it by, I don't know, 6 feet. Can we do that?
So
be the
what you're
purpose of
referring to is a flyover, but the flyover would have to be at a high level to meet Coast Guard minimum clearance requirements. Otherwise, it would be a bascule bridge that would need to open for vessels because it is a navigable water.
Let me recognize Commissioner Bond to follow up on her item.
So I was just going to suggest that whichever gets us there, better. If we can do a flyover, that would be ideal. It is the heavier of the two lifts because of the engineering, the fact that the land's already bought and not bought, but owned and built on. It's complicated. It doesn't mean that it's not doable, and I'm, all about the heavy lifts. So I would, to me, this is an opportunity, and we've talked about this at some great length, that this is an opportunity to really look far afield. This is not going to our usual pool of, the folks in South Florida who do this, but looking at engineers from around the world who are leading edge engineers who have had incredible successes doing things in Copenhagen and, these crazy bridges and tunnels and things that address these kinds of issues. So I think that for sure we should say yes, thank you to the twice an hour or once an hour that the Coast Guard is offering for overnight from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. For sure, we should say yes as soon as we can on that. And then move forward with this evaluation of what would it take to, potentially rebuild higher. Would that get us down to once an hour? That would be already significantly better. But ideally to get to a flyover and to really think differently about what it could look like. I mean, ideally, instead of having residents concerned about the fact that it's going to affect their views negatively, ideally the outcome of this would be that it would enhance their views and be this architecturally beautiful and striking place-making kind of infrastructure. And oh, by the way, we just had a whole conversation about concurrency needs for water and sewer issues, but the fact that traffic concurrency needs aren't met or aren't even regarded. And we have failed roads all over our city, and when we try to do different things with FDOT, they say, but no, the hurricanes. We have to deal with egress from the island with hurricanes, but we are failing at every turn on our roads. So if we can think big and get this done, this alleviates a huge amount of traffic impediments throughout the island. It's not just along that corridor, but it's for everybody going north and south. And so, or trying to get to north and south. So, I'm pretty excited about the possibility to make this happen.
So I just want to understand the administration's recommendations. Because right now, what the administration is recommending that we conduct a phase one analysis on the feasibility, on the feasibility of raising the elevation of 63rd Street Bridge. Is that correct? And that the funding be considered as part of the fiscal year 26 budget process?
That's correct.
Okay, all right. Do we believe okay, so that's where we're at right now. That's the only way we can get the ball rolling with FDOT.
That's correct.
Okay, sir.
So I just have a quick question. Is there no way to just go straight to the phase two feasibility study? Like, is the phase one necessary to show that it's not as useful of an option, or is it to see
The
how
goal
useful
would
it
be
is?
to conduct a phase one that would look at two options, and then the outcome of the phase one analysis would be a preferred option, and then
Okay.
we would take that option into
Got it.
phase two.
Okay. So am I allowed?
So the difference between, okay, so phase one evaluates the potential replacement of the bridge with a new bridge constructed at higher elevation than the current structure, with the objective of reducing the frequency of the bridge openings by accommodating a greater number of vessels that can pass. So it's just to see whether it's feasible.
Correct.
Okay, and then phase two would be detailed plans, concept plans, and cost estimates for design and construction.
Correct.
Okay.
But we already know what boats are there, right? I mean, there's only a finite number of boats with a finite height in Indian Creek, whether they're owned by the hotels. There's 2 hotels, I believe, that can that can charter boats there.
Anybody can go through, like a sailboat traversing from Maine can go through.
True, but there's really no reason to, right? I mean, you can't dock there, not anymore at least. And where I'm getting at is we kind of know who's going to be coming and who's going to be going out there, relatively speaking, right? Because we know that I think there's a big boat. There's a couple of big boats on Indian Creek. And maybe we need to do just a quick boat ride and see like how many boats are there at a certain height. And if your analysis of a bridge is not going to change anything because the boats there are a certain height, we know that that's not going to be effective or gets us to where we want to go.
Commissioner, we review the logs, the bridge logs, every month. We request them from FDOT and review them. The only thing is the logs do not get into that level of detail as to how high the vessel is. So
Right, what I'm
there's
saying
really
is
no-
if there's like 50 vessels there that are 50 feet in height, and they traverse regularly because they're owned by owners there, and our bridge is only, it goes up to 50 feet or 48, it's not really gonna do what we wanted it to do, right? So I think, I don't know, I'm just trying to give you guys some feedback on how you can kind of reverse engineer what we really need based on the boats that are there.
But would, if I may?
Yeah.
Would the Coast Guard accept parameters for a new bridge based on what currently exists on the waterway? Or are they trying to protect, I mean, it'd be great because then we could forego part of this. Or are they going to insist that it needs to be open to anybody, even if it doesn't make super amounts of sense to come down Indian Creek when you could just come down through the bay or through the ocean if you're a sailboat with a mast or something?
That is a good question, Commissioner. I'm not sure if the Coast Guard can regulate routes in terms of, if you're higher than so many feet, take this other route versus through Indian Creek. I'm not sure. I would venture to say that these are open, navigable bodies of water that are not restricted, but we need to ask the Coast Guard to see if there's any way to restrict the size of the vessels.
I mean,
think
you're welcome to use our waterways as long as you fit under our bridges, right? Like, that should be the way this goes. That if you have a very, a $50 million Google owner yacht, you're not gonna be coming down, like the stuff that gets docked in front of Bayside, you're not gonna be coming down Indian Creek necessarily. You'll be going into deeper water, and same thing with a sailboat of a certain size that has a pretty large mast.
And Commissioner Bob brings up a good point. Like, for example, Surprise Lake, there's no drawbridge to get to Surprise Lake. Why is Indian Creek, why is there a bridge required there to access Indian Creek?
I'm not sure. I know that bridge has been there since the early days. Certainly, I would say probably 1930s, 1940s, perhaps. It's
Yeah,
been-
but is there like is there a sort of process, not a process, but is there a rule of thumb for a body of water that requires a bridge?
The one thing I would say is that I think there's a lot of people that live along that waterway who have purchased along that waterway, whether they live on Collins Avenue and have docks fronting it, or whether they live on Pine Tree Drive facing that waterway. And they made an investment along that waterway knowing that they were going to have access to a bridge that opens. And so we need to be mindful of, the investments people have made, mindful of the fact that there is a bridge there that opens up that through which they're gonna have access to the bay. And so, I think we just have to be mindful of that as well.
Which goes to my point on if we're gonna be doing a study for a bridge that has, for a higher elevation, then let's take into account what boats the owners have in Indian Creek so that they don't require a drawbridge opening when coming in and coming out. At least a greater percentage of 50.
I think these are very good points, commissioners, which I think we can include as part of this phase one analysis and look into all these, all
So-
these potential.
So the administration is
Options.
recommending us to go forward, would proceed with phase one, contemplate the funding as part of the 26 budget. Does this need to go back to the commission to be referred to the budget process, or does it go from here straight to the budget process, Mr. Attorney?
I think if the committee makes a recommendation today, then the administration will take that into account as part of the budget process.
Is there, I think, can we adopt that by acclamation?
One last thing, and I don't want to throw a curveball at this because I'm in favor of both parts, but I know that people who live near the bridge they may not like the fact that it's getting opened up every hour, because what happens is you have a backlog of boats, party boats, that are waiting. They're blasting music at all hours of the day. Not all hours of the day, but between the drawbridge openings, and they have to wait there while they play music. I don't know, just a curveball, but since this is going to commission, I mean, we have plenty of time to engage.
Yeah, couldn't we do a quiet zone for the bridge? Like if you're a party boat, that's fine, but
It's technically, you have to, right? By law, you can't have a disruptive noise, so.
The thing is, we passed the law, the thing is, do they know of the law? And if they know about the law, are
how
they
do we
gonna
enforce it?
respect the law? And if they don't respect the law, are you gonna be there to enforce it when they're disrespecting it?
Yeah, maybe we put a sign on the bridge that says quiet zone and,
Yeah.
Punishable by this if.
That's certainly doable.
Yep.
All
I mean,
right,
frankly, we could do that today, right?
Yes.
we could.
And maybe, can we do that?
It's already
which is-
quiet zone.
Can we just, but can we get a
Sign.
sign made up on both sides of the bridge, and so whatever is currently in our laws, have it be visible?
Installing the sign would be simple. The only thing is, I just would want to make sure that we're not violating any maritime law or anything like that. For example, with railroads, I'm familiar with quiet zones as they pertain to railroads. And the Federal Railroad Administration, the FRA, has some very strict parameters that govern quiet zones. I'm not a maritime law expert, but I would like to consult with the Coast Guard
So
just
with
to
the-
make
with
sure
the
we're
quiet
not
zones
violating
With the railroads, that has to go through a process that gets approved
Right.
in order to put those quiet
for
zones.
railroads.
Right,
But I'm
and
not
so
sure.
you don't
if-
know whether here the same would apply.
Correct.
So can we initiate that? Does that need
Yes.
some kind
But
of?
we could put the signage on a seawall. We don't necessarily have to put it on the bridge.
I think we could put signs to the extent like we have on some of our roadways that say no honking. Something along those lines that would apply to vessels. I think we may be able to do that. I just don't know if there's any penalties that the city can
All right, so,
enforce
so can you,
for violations.
I don't think that this needs to be a legislative matter, right? For the signs?
What I would suggest is include that in your recommendation, and then when Jose and our office are able to determine what steps are required, then if we need to bring a code amendment, we can
Okay.
coordinate that.
So,
let's do
so
that.
with the approval of this item, we will include the recommendation that signage be placed for the quiet zone along the Indian Creek waterway at the 63rd Street intersection with the bridge. Let's open up for public comment. If there's anyone in person wishing to speak on this item, I see Larry Schaefer has his hand raised. Mr. Schaefer, welcome. You have 2 minutes to speak.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Tanya, for bringing this item for consideration. I just wanted to bring up something about funding. I'm reading now an article on Florida Politics. It's about how Bay Harbor Islands is replacing their bridge at a huge cost, and what I think is relevant here is that Senator Chevron Jones and the state representative Fabian Basabe went to the state and asked for and received funding for that local bridge project. So I believe that staff should reach out to our elected officials in Tallahassee to see if funding can be obtained for the 63rd Street flyover project. One of the things that popped out in that article that seemed to be very important is that these infrastructure items, these bridges, are important evacuation routes in the event of a hurricane. And so it may be possible to go beyond Tallahassee and reach out for federal dollars. And this article specifically mentions that there was some communication with the U.S. Department of Transportation Secretary last year. So I think this is a great item. Thank you, Tanya. It's a big item. Let's go and see if we can find some more money for it. And thank you all for all your hard work last night. I know that was a marathon session, so thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Any other members of the public wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none.
Mr. Chair, just one comment. Can the motion just specifically mention Commissioner Bott's recommendation for the administration to move forward with the restrictions during what is currently on-demand hours for that period to be on a schedule, the current schedule, which is on the half hour and hour, rather than on demand?
Yeah.
As amended.
And
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we did have one other hand up.
Oh, I see we have Elizabeth Latone. Elizabeth, welcome. You have 2 minutes to speak.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I have a suggestion, and I don't know if this was discussed, but I did hear, while Larry and I have been talking about all this bridge stuff, and of course Tanya as well, but what if we had some sort of fund that these new projects could, any of these new developments could contribute to, that would help fund our infrastructure, and the bridge being one. And then other people, it would be an ongoing continuous fund that other people could contribute to as well. For instance, maybe, I'm just saying there's things that haven't even broken ground yet, that those are possibilities. And I just would like for y'all to consider that as well.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I do know we do have a transportation fund, and that transportation fund is going to be facing significant impacts as it relates to the trolley service, as it relates to the water taxi, and a number of other capital improvements that we need. But perhaps there are other types of funds that I don't know what other types of funds or impact fees can be applicable towards this. But it's good input. Any other members of the public wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none in person, none on Zoom, there was a motion that was amended that I think we can adopt by acclamation. All right?
Yes.
And Mr. Chair, just to confirm, that's to send this to the full city commission with that recommendation.
Yes.
Oh, I thought it was going to the
Budget.
budget.
Well, as a matter of fact, right before the meeting, I was actually on the phone with the budget department. They advised that you will already be seeing this item as part of an enhancement request during the FERC workshops. So
Okay,
it's
so
already,
it's already there.
it's already there. It's already there.
Okay.
Okay. All right, with that, Mr. Director, let's call item number 1.
Okay, Mr. Chair, item number 1 is discuss safety concerns related to utility work performed on public property.
All right, and Commissioner Bond, this is your item. You're welcome to introduce your item.
Yeah, very briefly, we have found time and time again that public works get undertaken by third-party vendors, and they leave things in a less than ideal state when they're done. And the excuse is, oh, we're almost done, or oh, we'll be back to fix it next week, or oh, we're waiting for a part, or oh, whatever. And, you know, it goes from being a week to a year or longer. And there are sections of our neighborhoods that look like a war zone, and people have hurt themselves because of it. And it is, a disaster waiting to happen. And when I was reading through the memo, I was horrified to see that this issue goes back to 2016, and that you guys are working on correcting issues going back a decade. So You know, how do we clean this up? And how do we prevent this from happening in the first place so there isn't this backlog that needs to be rectified? And I don't know if I can, I think it's gonna have to be a different item, but it's a similar kind of a thought is when there are public works projects happening and parking gets moved from one side of the street to another or gets taken away completely and the vendor finishes work on a Friday but isn't coming back till Monday or Tuesday. We've had incidents where that parking is offline over the weekend, which is not great for residents. And so I don't know if that can kind of be snuck into this, this topic or if we need to bring something separately. But with that, I will turn it over to you, Rodney.
All right. Good afternoon, committee members. Rodney Knowles, Assistant Director for the Public Works Department. And we see that this can be addressed primarily through developing a closer relationship with not just the vendors that are performing the work within the right-of-way, but looking at our own staff and our process internally to do exactly what you mentioned. We have this backlog of permits that stretch as far back as 2016 in some cases that just haven't been closed out properly. The final inspection hasn't been, formally closed out. The project is finished, but just making sure that those right-of-way restorations happen the way that they should. We have 3 inspectors. We added a 3rd one recently. And everybody is, in addition to their normal duties, going back and eating at this backlog, knocking it down, and we anticipate being up to speed and current by the fall of this year. Going forward, developing a process where we are monitoring these activities much more closely, where 2 weeks before the anticipated finish of the project, we're asking them to consider requesting the final inspection. We're going through and we are just walking this thing through to make sure that it is executed properly and that the restorations are completed as completely as possible. So we see it as something that we can tackle internally and do on our end with staff.
So I don't want to rehash the past. I just want to educate myself on how this has happened because when I've asked, I often get told, they can't close out the permit until it is restored completely. Yet, we have projects going back a decade that presumably have closed permits, but, or maybe their permits were never closed, I'm not sure, but have not been restored. So educate me on how that lapse has happened.
Sure. And we've had some turnover with staff internally, so it was, and not to point fingers or anything like that, we've just had a transition over the years and a new system that we've implemented with regard to permitting. So in that conversion and losing staff, et cetera, things fell through the proverbial cracks, unfortunately. These projects are finished. The restoration has been completed to varying degrees, and we see situations where the restoration could have been done better. It's just a matter of contacting the vendor that performed the work and insisting that it be done to standards. And we've been talking with our colleagues internally within Public Works and other departments, establishing what that standard is for closeout. And I'll use green space management, for example. If they've disrupted a landscaping and their restoration is installing liners or 1 gallon plant material in a bed that's well established for quite a while, the difference, it looks sloppy and it looks nasty. So it's just a matter of coordinating with our colleagues saying, look, what do you consider an acceptable standard for closeout? And that's a conversation that we had recently. And we're working closely with the landscape inspectors and green space, working along with the right-of-way inspectors as a team, as opposed to separate entities doing their own thing and then complaining when it isn't done properly.
So does this need to be codified? I mean, there will always be turnover and transition in an organization as large as ours. So how do we make sure this doesn't, like it's great right now, you're on top of it, which is awesome. And it sounds like there's buy-in from all the departments, which is also awesome. But 5 years from now, 10 years from now, everyone's taken off and we all won the lottery and have departed. And how do you make sure this doesn't happen again?
Memorialize it in our SOPs. Something that we have in black and white and established that transcends all of our employees, that this is the established standard and it's passed on and it's updated regularly. So
and is that work in progress already?
Yes.
Okay. And are you having any pushback from vendors who might have done a job 3 years ago and were like, dude, we closed that out, we're not coming back?
Sometimes getting them on board could be a challenge, getting them to be responsive, but they intend on doing work in the city going forward, so they want to be good partners, and we found that looking forward and them wanting to do work in the city again has motivated them to come back and do right by us.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
I just want to bring up, recently I've received complaints from Sunset Harbor in the evening hours. Apparently, there's a contractor that's going in that is doing underground work, that then is pumping water out, is going into other properties. Do you know anything about this? Right of way.
1 second, the right-of-way manager is here also, he's joining us.
Good afternoon, committee members. Alexander Alvarez, right-of-way manager. I believe you're talking about 1759 Purdy. It's an FPL project, an emergency project. We reached out to them yesterday. They're dewatering, not into private areas, but because of the level of the neighboring properties, that water is going into their private property. But we reached out last night via email, and they will be addressing it tonight. But it is an emergency work. It wasn't planned, wasn't scheduled. There's loss of service in that area.
And when they tell us that they're doing something as it relates to an emergency work, how do we verify that? Because now it's happened twice.
Right.
Where they've gone in twice over a very short period of time to do this type of work, and it's affecting nearby properties. So how do we verify that?
So emergency work for us, specifically for FPL, translate to restoration work. They call it restoration because there's either loss of power or a backup feeder is out. This restoration work is usually limited to cable pulling, so there's really no excavating. So that's kind of how we know when this is truly an emergency. When it goes past cable pulling or we need to excavate, it changes the nature of emergency work. So that's how we keep aware of the emergency nature. And we follow up, they usually give us a timeline and expectation of work. It's usually to fix that backup feeder, a short-term repair, and then we'll have a long-term repair permitted correctly where plans are reviewed, and then the actual permit is issued for the final restoration.
Okay, great. Commissioner Mott, anything else for this item?
No.
All right, you want to keep this item open, or we can close this item?
I think we can close it.
All right, so we can.
Let me know, how it's going, but I don't think we need a whole committee item for it.
Okay, great. So, seeing no members of the public in person wishing to speak on this item, none with their hands raised on Zoom, we can go ahead and close this item. With that, Mr. Director, let's call item number 3.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chair, item number 3 is discuss status of Ocean Drive Corridor Improvement and Loomis Park Enhancement Project.
Okay. Commissioner Bont, this is your item. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor alongside our colleague, Commissioner Joseph Magazines.
You know what? I'm just gonna let you take it, David.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. David Gomez, Director of Capital Improvements. If there's one thing I've learned on this project is that I now officially hate traffic studies. They take forever and they're very hard to understand and they present all sorts of challenges. As I'm sure you are familiar, this project has been in the traffic study phase since April of last year. And in October of last year, the City Commission passed a resolution to begin implementing the improvements to the west side of Ocean Drive. Our consultants prepared an analysis and a presentation that was shared during a public meeting on March 6th. And unfortunately, we could not get consensus from those in attendance on what their preferences were. We did develop and publish an online survey, which again asked various different questions. The takeaway from that online survey was essentially that those that responded, I don't remember the number now off the top of my head, but I want to say it was over 400 folks. Those that responded preferred to wait for the permanent improvement to Ocean Drive before beginning an implementation of the improvements on the west side sidewalk. As you will recall, on March 21st during the city commission. I did provide an update to the commission on where we were with the analysis, and we will be coming back to the commission July 25th with the consultant to present the findings of the traffic study and the recommendations on the different configurations. Hopefully, we walk away from that meeting with direction from commission on which configuration is the preferred option. We did hear during last month's commission meeting that there is a preference for full pedestrianization. So we will come back in July and provide that update and hopefully get direction.
So let me just ask you, so the Calvin
Giordano.
Their work was to look at only the Ocean Drive portion, or were they contracted to look at the totality of the Ziskovich plan adopted in 2022 and see what aspects of it would be feasible to move forward in?
Their scope of work was specific to the Ocean Drive corridor
Okay.
and the master plan for Lomas Park.
Okay. All right. So, and you're saying that that's going to come back to us when?
Next, not June, the July commission meeting.
The July commission meeting. What portions of it we should be moving forward with?
It will be their presentation on, and their recommendation on which configuration for Ocean Drive, whether it's one-way, two-way, or full pedestrianization. And then once we get direction from commission, they will then begin developing the 30%.
But why do we need a consultant to tell us whether we want to do full pedestrianization or not, when that's a policy decision that I think this commission has been pretty clear on where it stands on that policy matter?
It's actually tied to the results of the traffic study. If the traffic study, which indications haven't been this far.
I thought that the Calvin Giordano, the purpose was, and perhaps it's my error because, the Ziskovich plan was, very creative, had many elements. But then I thought that the purpose of hiring this architectural design firm was to reach out, engage the community, get feedback from the community, see what our budget was, what could we do in our means together with the desires of the community, and then come back with kind of like the haircut version, kind of like molded to what we could actually afford that was aligned with the desires of the community. I'm going to recognize our Assistant City Manager, David Martinez.
And Commissioner, what you described is part of what Calvin Giordano will be doing. However, before they do that, in order to for the commission, the mayor and commission to make a decision on the configuration of Ocean Drive, the traffic studies are required because it impacts, of course, as we all know, the county has to have a say in it. FDOT has to have a say in it because it also impacts Collins Avenue, which is a state road. And it constitutes, for us to change Ocean Drive from whatever it is today, it constitutes lane repurposing, which has a statute that tells us what we need, what process we need to make. So we would not want to come to the commission recommending or asking you, what do you want to do with it? And then you tell us you want to do something, and we go back and then something it can't be done because they don't agree with us. So ahead of going out to the community, we have to do this upfront work that's taken quite a bit of time to gather all the data that's going to be presented and what you're
So
going to
we still haven't formally gone out to the community.
We have had a couple of meetings with community stakeholders, including the public meeting that was held in March, most recently, as well as two of the associations. We've also met with them, and we have gotten some feedback.
There's something that's not right here. I'm sorry, but there's something that's not right here. We engaged this consultant in 2022. In 2022, this consultant was supposed to start with the stakeholder engagement. I don't understand how it is that since 2022, the only stakeholder engagement is that meeting where we were all at and two homeowners associations. There's something really wrong here.
The bulk of the time, the award for CGA did happen in 22. The execution, it was at the end of 22, so they started in 23.
3 years ago.
The bulk of the time between 2023 and when they began the traffic study in April of last year was arguing back and forth with the county and FDOT on how to perform the traffic study, which methodology to use, what number of studies they needed to do, how many intersections. It was a long, drawn-out process. Just arranging meetings with DOT took forever.
Were we paying them this whole time?
It's all part of their fee.
So it didn't, like, the fact that it's been dragged out 2.5 years does not increase the cost?
No, there was an amendment, but the amendment came as a result of additional traffic studies resulting from those discussions. It wasn't part of their base fee. That time was all included in their base fee.
In addition, part of the delay included the county not wanting to make any decisions because of the situation with the lawsuit associated with Ocean Drive, the Clevelander, and all of that. So if the county would not tell us they agree or disagree or not, then we couldn't move forward. So that's part of what was involved in the delay of coming up with a strategy on how to analyze the traffic data and the models that were going to be used to analyze that. And just one more thing, what Calvin Giordano is going to come in July is not to tell you what you should do, is to tell you what can be done and give you options so that you all can make an educated decision on which way to address Ocean Drive.
Options as it relates to whether to pedestrianize or not.
Correct. What they're going to say is, if you choose to go one way, these are the parameters that we see. If you choose to go back to two ways, these are it. And if you choose to fully pedestrianize or some hybrid, these are the parameters. I don't think at this point the evidence or the results of the study have shown anything that's not doable.
Correct.
There's just different variations of what can be done and different impacts.
How quickly can we move? The moment this comes back to us in July, you said?
Mm-hmm.
How quickly do we move forward at that point? And let's not forget, we talk about the threats to the postcard of our city. This is the postcard. This is the postcard. Ocean Drive, Loomis Park. This is the most pedestrian, the most popular, the most iconic, the most photographed part of our city. That park is our biggest attraction as it relates to parks. We have Muscle Beach there. We have the playground there. We have just so much going on there. So how quickly do we move after July?
As soon as we have direction from commission, they begin the 30% drawings and the formal permitting process. As you know, the permitting process with the county on repurposing roads specifically is difficult and time consuming. So we are anticipating going before the HPB with the design in May of next year. And then once we get approval from HPB, it's a matter of months for completion of design and then construction.
Okay, and so from July to construction, are we talking about 12 months, 24 months, 36 months?
From July to construction, you lost me there.
July 25th, when we give direction.
You're looking at probably 18 months.
18 months, okay.
And everything that's going to be presented on July 25th is doable per county and state laws. We're not going to have any surprises where they change their mind or...
CGA has been having discussions with both the county and DOT. We have not seen any flaws yet in any of the configurations which would prohibit the configuration. We may need to do additional items. We may need to change additional signals. We may need to remove parking spaces on Collins. There's things that I don't have the details for, but each option will present its own challenges and needs.
David, let me ask you, back in February, this commission unanimously approved a resolution for lighting, landscaping, and irrigation improvements to Loomis Park.
Yes.
It is my understanding that that is going to require, procurement and an architect and engineering company to be contracted. So that to me equates time. You're telling me that the greater project is 18 months from breaking ground. So based on that, if it's 18 months from breaking ground, is it even advantageous to engage in this east, on these improvements on Loomis Park?
There are some specific needs in Lummis Park, which is what you're referring to. We have met with Parks and Recreation and we've looked at that scope. There was a brief while where I was considering having CGA implement that as part of their overall plan. But I think I don't want to distract them from what they're doing on the other stuff. So we're actually looking at a different consultant to do that. The purpose, of course, being identifying those things that we can improve now that will be part of the final product.
But are we going to spend time procuring, and when we already have a company that is specifically an architectural design services company, already part of a broader project for this, for Ocean Drive, Loomis Park?
Their current scope does not include the improvements you're talking about, so I would have to come back with an amendment anyway.
And so if we do go out to procurement, is this something is this a jock contract? Is this a push button?
We would be using one of the rotational consultants off of our continuing services.
Okay, so it's a more expedited form of procurement. Okay, and so from the moment we award, how quickly do we anticipate we can see work happening in Loomis Park as it relates to lighting? I mean, the lighting, we have lighting there, but it trips because there's no proper infrastructure. We want landscaping there, better landscaping, but you can't have better landscaping without the irrigation.
Right.
So, how long would it take from awarding the contract to implementation?
I would be hesitant to give you a time without having the consultant on board so that I know how much they have to do.
Are we going to be making an investment that later is going to be ripped out as part of the bigger project?
The overall master plan for Lummis Park is a little further down the line.
You told me it's 18 months.
No, that's Ocean Drive.
Okay.
The CGA is currently only preparing a master plan for Lummis. That's a much bigger project.
Okay.
So the whatever we do now will be useful, and obviously we would look at incorporating whatever we can so that it's part of the final product.
All right. Are there any other comments from the dais?
I was just gonna say this, make sure that whatever we do now gets incorporated into the plan going forward, so we're not doing stuff, ripping it out, redoing stuff.
Yes, ma'am.
So Loomis Park is a much bigger project than Ocean Drive,
Yes.
but we need to know what we're doing with Ocean Drive before we do with Loomis Park, right?
The scope for CGA is to develop the master plan so that they know so that we can plan what the interface is between the Ocean Drive corridor and the park. So for example, if there's a specific entry, we'll plan for that now so that whatever we do in the corridor complies later.
So this city commission right now is gonna be the determining factor of how Ocean Drive and Loomis Park is going to look
Yes,
for the next foreseeable future.
yes, sir.
Oh, how exciting.
All right. With that, are there members of the public wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none in person. I see Mitch Novick has his hand raised. Mitch, welcome.
Hey,
You have
good.
2 minutes to speak.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Mitch Novick here. Taxpayers spent $650,000 for Ziskovich and Associates to present an estimated $100 million plan for Lummis Park, which entails relocating Ocean Drive into the park, destroying the vestiges of the original 1870s coconut plantation, which remain today. In light of the county charter's explicit prohibition on placing public roadways within parks, my question is, has malpractice occurred? There's a $20 million goal for Ocean Drive, which really can't be used in terms of relocating Ocean Drive. Ocean Drive has very little infrastructure. The infrastructure for Ocean Drive can be found on Ocean Court. My question is, why don't you just spend the $5 million allocated for Lummis Park on planting more coconut palms and a few sea grape trees and abandon this crazy plan which can't be realized? And as far as pedestrianization of the roadway is concerned, it's already been decided by the courts, and the county said that Ocean Court was never designed to handle the traffic capacity that Ocean Drive requires to service the buildings along that street. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch. Any other members of the public wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none, I do agree with the comments about, putting the street through the park. Even changing the street to being a curved street. To me, Ocean Drive has always been a straight street, and it goes with from my perspective, with the style of the architecture, the streamline and Art Deco architecture on Ocean Drive. And the moment you see, it's a very rectilinear style of architecture with rectilinear streets and curving it and putting it through the park. That's not something that I'm gonna align with. So, without any other comments on this item? All right, let's. Yes, Dave.
I'm not sure if Tom had brought it up before, but item number 8 is basically the same topic, so I don't know, you can probably.
Well, I think with 8, let's see, let's look at item number 8. Sponsored by Commissioner Bond, to discuss the status of the, yeah, so I think we can show items number 3 and item number 8 as addressed. With that, let's call item number 11.
Okay, Mr. Chair, item number 11 is discuss and identify potential sites for the installation of the Glory of Old Glory, a series of murals by artist Enzo Gallo, which were removed, preserved, and donated to the city prior to the demolition of the Wells Fargo Bank on Alton Road.
Thank you, Mr. Director, and this is a CIP item, and we have David Gomez.
It is, and I am still here.
Here at the podium. I figured let's go back with a CIP item. Tell us where are we with the placement of the murals at the 72nd Street Community Center?
As you will recall, this body referred an item to commission in May, asking them to consider the placement of the Enzo Gallo murals at 72nd Street. They approved that recommendation, and we are here today to present the preliminary findings from the design consultant for the 72nd Street complex.
Okay.
What they have determined is that there is no interior wall large enough to accommodate these murals. These murals are 15 feet by 15 feet, so it's hard to get that kind of interior open space. So they can't accommodate it inside the building, but they have identified 2 exterior walls that could potentially accommodate the artwork. They're on the southeast corner and the northeast corner, facing 73rd and 72nd Street. That's a potential. They do need to do a little more study to confirm it, and ultimately the placement and the design of it would have to be approved by DRB as part of the exterior facade of the building. There is a cost should the body decide to proceed with further investigation, that I'd have to issue an amendment to the consultants so that they can do the additional modeling and additional design work involved to prepare those documents. We are asking, or we are recommending, that should this body and the commission decide to proceed with placing it at 72nd, that we do so through the 26 budget process.
Okay. I just, I think it's important to remember that Arts and Public Places did issue a recommendation back in 2022 supporting the preservation of the murals. And I think we need to keep in mind the civic nature of these murals, and how it's not every day that we are building a civic facility where this type of artwork would be contextual and appropriate. And to that extent, I'm I'm supportive of course, I'm biased because I worked with MDPL in preserving these murals, and so of course I have a certain level of bias. I want to see them placed. They're beautiful murals. They're patriotic murals, and they do belong in a civic facility. So I'm fine with us moving forward with having them explore whether they can be properly placed on the exterior of the building. Commissioner Bott.
Yeah, I'm super supportive of it. I think it would be really an upgrade, not an upgrade, an enhancement of an already important community benefit of having this complex there. And I think it puts them in a high visibility spot adjacent to the band shell and to parks where lots of people would be able to see and enjoy them and restore them, no pun intended, to their former glory, as they should be.
So the administration's recommendation was for us to evaluate the inclusion of the murals. Let's see. What action do you need from us today, David?
A recommendation to the commission to include the murals at the 72nd Street project and looking to identify the funding through the fiscal 26 budget cycle.
And the funding that you would need as part of the 26 funding cycle would be so that they can be placed?
It would be for design and analysis, including the analysis by the restorer, so that to determine how it would be mounted and how it would be placed on the northeast or southeast corner.
Okay.
Is part of the funding, can part of the funding in terms of the installation come from the GeoBond project itself? I understand that the restorer needs to assess and evaluate and figure out how this is going to be done, but like no.
I'm very concerned, as you know, the construction budget is very tight. And the previous information provided by facilities and the restorer is that the artwork alone, to restore the artwork alone, is somewhere between $2 and $4 million. It's not a small amount.
Mr. Chair, if I may?
Yes.
We may want to consider is maybe moving a little slower. We do have a little time to design this facility and go through a lot of the stages. Is to move a favorable recommendation to commission directing staff to proceed with a feasibility and costing of where it could go on the building, what it could look like, and then bringing that back to you, showing you what it is. At that point in time, it'll have a price tag in terms of what it would cost to implement. And then at that point, we can make a decision if you do want to proceed and to actually implement it in the building or not.
I support that. I think that's.
And also to prioritize, because there is going to be a cost, of course, of the feasibility analysis. I don't know if you have that number, David, but there will be that, also include that. That's what I think what you're asking to include in the 26 budget is to conduct that feasibility.
The 26 budget would actually be what you identified as the cost to install, as well as the full design. The feasibility, I have a range right now, somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000. It's not finalized because they were still waiting on some of the consultants.
So what I'm suggesting is let's approve, let's send to the commission to proceed with the feasibility of that in the ballpark of $40,000 to $60,000, excuse me, to conduct that, bring it back to the body. We can put a placeholder in the 26 budget in case we decide we want to proceed, so that there's a placeholder for full design and then future implementation when the facility is constructed.
When it is implemented, the feasibility structure is study is going to take some time, and going through the process will take some time. When it is implemented, in theory, the CRA will have more funds in its coffer. And this is a permanent art structure installation. So in theory, the CRA could help defray some of the costs. So let's keep that in mind as well. So maybe $1 million comes out of the general, our budget, and $1 million comes out of the CRA.
I just want to be also very mindful, and I appreciate it. Actually, with this, I think, you have your item on the North Beach master plan, and I believe this falls part of the master plan. Correct me, David, if I'm wrong. Is the 72nd Street complex?
A civic type complex on that property, I think in some form or another was contemplated in the North Beach Master
I
Plan.
just want to make sure that, you know, moving forward, you know, the CRA funds, which are very precious funds, I think, you know, seeing how they align, their use aligns with the North Beach Master Plan. Otherwise, we're gonna end up using those funds for a lot of different things rather than the unified and aligned vision of a very important master and governing document for the area. In this case, it makes sense because it is part of that document. So
Well, and I
it's a
will
good
say
idea.
there's been some very robust discussion at the CRA advisory committees about how to disperse the funds, how to use them. There is state oversight that we were contemplating having. I think the item is not such a big stick over our heads right now, but, you know, we're very mindful of how those funds get used and that they fit within the mission of the CRA, and it's supporting the vision of North Beach.
All right, with that.
So, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Do we need to, would we need to then send something to the North Beach CRA to get them to agree, or is that premature
Well,
at
I
this
think,
point?
I think for right now, we don't need a funding source for that
Yep,
just
okay.
yet. We're just doing a feasibility study, which we're gonna try to incorporate into the 26 budget.
Okay.
Is that correct, David?
Correct, we still need the money, the authorization from commission to spend
Right,
the
and
money,
that'll
the
be through the
feasibility,
budget
on the
process.
feasibility,
Right,
before we even get into construction and full design.
okay. With that, is there anyone from the public present to speak on this item? Seeing none in person, I see Larry Schaefer has his hand raised on Zoom. Larry, welcome, you have 2 minutes to speak.
Thank you. I would just like to bring up the possibility that maybe there are other locations for these gorgeous murals. The existing North Shore Park and Youth Center has a large exterior wall on 72nd Street between Harding and I believe that's Dickens there. They may have interior wall space at the existing North Shore Park and Youth Center, a building that's already built. And we're not going to be waiting for years to see these murals if we choose that. Another place could possibly be the Miami Beach Band Shell, although from an artistic perspective, you might want to keep those walls neutral and available for projections. A third site might be Unidad interior walls or exterior walls. And then the last idea for a location, there is a wall on 72nd Street at the beach access that may be owned by the Burley House. It's a very visible wall. I think there may have been some ideas for murals there before, but that is an existing exterior wall that would allow us to receive and enjoy the benefits of this mural now and not tie the delivery to some date that keeps getting pushed off with that 72nd Street project. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. That's some great feedback right there. All right, with that, let's show this item adopted by acclamation with funding to be considered as part of the 26 budget.
Did you want to continue it to a future date? So as David said, it could be brought back to you, or did you want to just re-refer when it's ready to come back to you?
Mr. Martinez.
I think you can direct us to bring it back when it's ready
Okay,
for y'all to opine.
All right.
And move on to the next
we will
step.
do that. Yes.
So we'll leave it on as a future item.
I think we can close it and, you know, we can bring back a new item, a new referral.
Okay. All right.
Okay, all right. Okay, with that, thank you, David. I don't think capital improvements has any other item on the agenda.
I'm here in support of environment sustainability for the North Beach Master Plan, no, excuse me, economic development for the North Beach Master Plan.
And that's the next item we were going to call because it does tie in well. Item number 4, Mr. Director, let's call that item.
Okay, Mr. Chair, item number 4 is discuss the status of the North Beach Master Plan.
All right, Commissioner Bond, this is your item. You're welcome to present it.
My legs.
Okay, let me just allow Commissioner Bond to present her item.
Yes, so the master plan was a huge success in terms of its creation, in terms of its community buy-in and the vision that came out from it. it then seemed to be kind of cherry-picked by prior policy decisions, and since then, nobody's really talked about it. So I tasked Heather with, or we all tasked Heather with putting together a spreadsheet to identify what had been highlighted as things we wanted to do, where we were on them, if those were no longer relevant, if they'd become obsolete, and to really keep a close eye on what's going on. And so I believe that's what this is going to be doing, an update on that. And if you haven't had a chance to look at the spreadsheet in some detail, it is a very useful document, and it is a living, breathing document as we evolve as a community, and I think it will continue to be incredibly useful. So thank you for creating it.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you, Heather Shaw, Assistant Director, Economic Development, and thank you, Commissioner, for doing a great tee-up of what we're doing here. It is definitely a fluid document. It started with Plan NOBI, and then it turned into the master plan, which is about the quality of life for North Beach, and that was all done before we actually created the North Beach CRA, which is now moving forward with it. And as you can see, the Plan NOBI had 27 projects initially in 2018. We are now still tracking 23 projects, of which 8 have been completed, 14 are in progress, and 5 have been deemed deferred or not viable. This is something that is definitely a citywide department effort. I am joined by my colleague David Gomez from CIP, and definitely transportation and parks, and a number of departments are working on this, and we work diligently to update all the projects. You will see in the memo, there's a chart that talks about the value of all of these projects. One of the things that we are working on is to make sure, as you mentioned, Commissioner, that they keep the energy and that they're moving forward. And part of what we're also doing with the North Beach CRA is we're going to do a 5-year strategic plan so these projects get prioritized and they are actually delivering on the elements of the North Beach CRA to make sure that they are delivered in time, and that the money that is generated from the CRA we make sure that that is supporting these projects being completed. And we would like to continue to update this with you regularly and come back at another time as each project progresses.
I think that'd be great. I would like to see those updates. Is there anything you need from us? Are there any roadblocks, any impediments that have sprung up that you need some assistance with?
Well, as you will see in the chart, there are a number of projects that have to be funded. So that's something that we, again, with the North Beach CRA, will hopefully flush out so we can prioritize them on the funding. I kind of turn to my colleague David. He has the lion's share of the construction projects and the funding for those.
I'm actually happy to report that the projects under CIP's portfolio are funded, so we are moving ahead with those, and we're planning the implementation of those. You will note in the chart that a lot of the projects that require additional funding are transportation or other departments that have projects listed.
How many of the projects are CIP projects?
CIP has the highest number, then transportation and mobility, and then the disparate departments.
11 projects are CIP.
Could we get a simple breakdown of the completed projects?
I'm sorry, of?
The completed projects?
Yeah.
I know we have 8 completed projects and 14 that are in progress and 5 that are deferred or not feasible. Could we just get a list of those?
Yes.
Thank you.
Definitely do that.
You know, it just to make it simple also, as we keep referring back to the chart, it might make sense to color code, you know, choose your colors, but these have been completed, these are work in progress, these are kind of next up in the queue, and these are orphans, or, you know, whatever you want to identify. But I think that way we can take a quick look at what's been done, what's work in progress.
Did your chart not come out color-coded?
I'm getting the feeling that your chart didn't print correctly.
Yeah, ours are color-coded.
No, ours aren't. Okay.
Okay.
Then never mind.
I will email that to you, so you got them color-coded.
Thank you.
All right. And I just, you know, I think that this master plan is such a great tool. Commissioner Bond, thank you for bringing it to the committee. I think as we look at North Beach, as we look at our investments in North Beach, how do we stick to the master plan? How do we discipline ourselves so that when we talk about investments of the taxpayers' dollars in North Beach, we go back and before we approve them, we determine, is it aligned with what is in the master plan? Because otherwise, if we keep on doing short wins, quick wins that require money, but are not in the master plan, then we'll never be able to accomplish this great vision that's here. And so we just, I think we need the administration to kind of discipline the commission, kind of like, raise a flag, just, you're looking to do palm trees, but, and that's gonna just make it harder to accomplish the broader, bigger vision of the master plan. Commissioner Bott, I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we need to make sure that it's a balance of what we can see and touch and feel now, because people like to know that there is progress, but also making sure we're not doing end runs around the stuff that is going to be maybe a little bit longer and harder to do, but still needs to get done.
Our city manager says going for the big rocks, so we want to make sure that we have the big rocks, but we're also, as you said, Commissioner, getting some of the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, and the low-hanging fruit is great, but, I came up today on another conversation having to do, I was getting an update on Miami Beach Drive, short-term improvements versus long-term improvements. And, sometimes the desire might be there to do the short-term improvements, but if we focus so much on the short-term improvements, we're not gonna have the money to put a project into the capital plan, have it go through the 5-year plan to get funded, because we just spent the wheels on the short term. So, with that, is there any member of the public wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none in person and none in Zoom, Commissioner Bott, what would you like to do with this item?
Do you want to come back in 6 months?
That would be great.
Okay,
Thank you very much, Commissioners.
thank you.
Thank you. And remember, please keep us disciplined as it relates to this, center us back around this vision of the master plan.
Will do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll show this as continued to the January 2026 meeting for further updates.
Thank you. Mr. Director, let's call item number 5.
Okay, Mr. Chair, item number 5 is monthly updates on historic hotel development on Collins Avenue between 14th and 20th Streets, including an overview of pending permits and progress updates from development teams.
Mr. Director, why don't you provide us with an update of where we are at with the different projects? Have we received any feedback from any of the property owners?
Sure. The spreadsheet's been updated to create different columns for completed projects, which include the Nassau and the Shelburne, open and operational hotels, which have approvals for renovations, and most importantly, those that are closed and currently under construction. As far as the projects that are open, the Henrosa and the Aqua, the work is fairly limited. The Ritz Sagamore, they do have a permit applied for. We're not sure exactly when they will be coming in to complete that, but they are open and operational. The National is also going through more modest types of renovations. And the Nautilus Hotel is currently open as it's only a limited scope of work. Regarding the projects that are closed and under construction, the Royal Palm Hotel recently closed, and they're undergoing a fairly significant renovation. They did receive HPB approval. The Delano.
How long do we anticipate for the Royal Palm to be closed for?
Probably, I would say, based upon the amount of work that they're doing, between 9 and 12 months.
Okay.
And
And,
then-
is this like a remodeling or is this physical alterations to the building?
Both. There's mostly remodeling, but they're not like making any physical alterations to the historic structures. It's mostly a lot of, I'd say probably 90% remodeling. They are making some physical changes to the pool deck, but this is probably more of an extreme makeover on the interior.
How many rooms do we believe are at the Royal Palm?
I think they're close to 300 rooms, between 300 and
300
400
rooms.
rooms.
That's,
Yeah.
you know, that's an impact. And they closed to when?
They closed recently, probably within the last 30 days.
Okay.
The Delano, we believe, is nearing completion. They have indicated that they expect to be open sometime in late 2025. But according to my staff, they're really moving forward with their construction, and we wouldn't be surprised if they open earlier than that.
And how many rooms is the Delano?
I think the Delano is around 100 rooms.
100 rooms, okay. And then the Rally, well, what is happening with the Rally?
The site has a construction fence. They have indicated that they are moving forward with construction. They have an active building permit, and there has been work done on the site.
All right, and the Shore Club?
Their permit is in application status. They estimate their reopening will be sometime in 2027. But they are moving forward and they're close to getting their permit approved.
Okay. 1500 Collins.
That's the Haddon Hall. They have gotten their HPV approvals, which is eligible for an extension of time, but they have not yet applied for a permit for their proposed, they're doing both an expansion and a renovation. This project is combined with the other portion of the project on Washington Avenue.
Is there anything of concern that you think needs to be
No.
brought to our attention? Okay.
And then the last would be the Bulgari. They recently went to the Historic Preservation Board to receive approval for additional modifications to their scope of work. And this was about 2 weeks ago. And all indications are that they are moving forward because the permit has been issued and they expect to complete construction in 2027.
What is going on with the Bancroft?
The Bancroft is closed. They still have their planning board approval and HPB approval for a conversion to office. They've maintained that, but they have also represented to us that they are exploring a live local project at that site. But they have not yet submitted an application.
Okay, and so at that location, in what ways the Bancroft can't be demolished?
The Bancroft under Live Local, if the new Live Local is signed into law, could potentially be demolished, but there would be a requirement for replacing the facade. However, they would lose non-conforming setbacks if they were to demolish it. So our
So in essence,
understanding,
because of our setbacks, they wouldn't be able to benefit from the same setbacks, so it's in their interest to keep the current building because.
that's correct.
Got it. Okay. All right. Any other comments from the dais? No? All right. Questions? Are there any members of the public wishing to speak on this item? Seeing none, I think we can complete this item for this meeting. Let's see. Let's call item number 15.
Okay. Item number 15 is discuss possible legislation regulating temporary and/or transitional housing.
Okay, so this item was placed on the agenda, given what we have all experienced, the inhumane placement of homeless individuals at a facility that doesn't offer the proper services to homeless individuals. A hostel with a bar and a beer garden that doesn't offer the supportive services that homeless individuals deserve. And so this item was placed on the agenda to discuss possible legislation to regulate temporary and transitional housing in our city to avoid this type of situation happening in the future. Now, more specifically, I just, as it relates to this issue, it's been said that there's a state law that prohibits unregulated shelters like the one at the Bikini Hostel. And that if that law had been enforced years ago, we wouldn't be facing the situation we're facing at the Bikini Hostel. I'm not aware of any such law, but Nick, you are our city attorney. Are you aware of any state law that prohibits the use of the Bikini Hostel as a shelter?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not aware of any state law that would operate in that manner. I think that if you or the committee is inclined to look at our regulations on hostels, that's something that we can work with you on. I think, the difficulty with the Bikini Hostel situation is that the Bikini Hostel is licensed as a hotel, which is a transient lodging establishment. The County Homeless Trust Hotel and Motel Program does provide for temporary housing in hotels and motels, but we could look at our regulations to see where in the city hostels should be permitted.
So that would be, so in other words, hostels can be used, can be rented out. Nothing can be done to prohibit hostels from renting a room to be used by an individual that doesn't have a permanent home.
Correct.
Okay. And so if we do not want to find ourselves in this situation again in the city, the only way that we can find ourselves away from the situation is in essence by prohibiting hostel uses in the city and phasing out existing hostels.
I would recommend, and we can work with you on this, on looking at our hostel regulations and identifying where, if at all, they should be permitted as a zoning matter.
You see, the thing is, hostels have been a part of the fabric of our city. I hate to, do away with something that there are people that do want to come to Miami Beach. There are kids that come here on vacation that the only place that they can afford to stay at is in a hostel. And I don't know, do we want to close the door on that? Is there a way where we can require, if, for example, you go to different countries, you go to a hotel. The hotel requires you to show your passport. Can we require for hostels to require someone to have a permanent address in order to stay there?
No, we are broadly preempted from regulating the business operations of public lodging establishments, which includes hotels, motels, and hostels. So we couldn't impose a requirement like that on somebody staying in a hotel or hostel. Yeah.
Yes, Commissioner Bond.
Is there a way, if we're not able to, or we choose not to do anything about hostels, when I lived in Europe, I stayed in hostels when I went on bike trips. They're awesome. The good ones are well run and clean and hospitable. They're fabulous. Some are not. And I would tell you that as a 16-year-old on a bike trip, if I were checking into a hostel that had at least as many homeless folks staying there as people on bike trips, I would not have been super psyched, nor would my parents. And is there a way to require that if hostels are participating in this lodging program, the hotel motel program, that they are required to let registering guests know that they have a mix of folks who are staying there as part of the Homeless Trust program, as well as regular visitors from a public safety perspective.
I would suspect that that would be encompassed by the same state preemption. We can look at that issue, but I think because that would be essentially a regulation on the business operations
But
of the hostel.
it's coming from a public safety angle, because we're not telling them they can't book either type of guest, and we're not telling guests that they can't stay there or shouldn't stay there. It's just giving people the opportunity to make an informed decision. You know, if you're sending your kid here for spring break as a senior in high school, you might choose to make a different choice if you had that information. To me, that's a public safety issue.
We can look at that. Again, the preemption is very broad.
Okay.
Okay. So your suggestion is just more broadly to look at the areas of the city where we want to allow hostels and where we do not want to allow hostels.
Correct.
How many hostels do we currently have in the city?
I think we've got probably 3 to 4 that actually operate and are licensed as hostels. Now, I'm sure there's a few more that are licensed as hotels because they were licensed before we created a definition for hostel, even though operationally they probably act as a hostel.
Okay, would staff come back next month with recommendations of limitations of how we can limit these, and whether we want to limit the amount of the existing hostels, setting an amortization period to phase out the existing hostels in our city?
September might be better, Nick, unless you think you can put something together pretty quickly.
Well, there's two parts to it. One is where, as a zoning matter, hostels should be an allowable use. The other part, Mr. Chairman, I would like to meet with you on, but we should set this for a few months so that we have time to work with you on that.
Sure. Yes.
So we'll say by acclamation, continue this to September 11th with direction to work on legislation regarding the further regulation of hostels.
Yes, and before we do that, I want to open the floor to members of the public wishing to speak. If there's anyone in person wishing to speak on this item, please approach the podium. Elizabeth Latone, you have your hand raised on Zoom. Welcome, you have 2 minutes to speak.
Hi, good afternoon again. I've long been confused about this whole hostel situation. I thought at one point, and I know in New York and other states and even in other countries, there's an age cap. And I wondered if that's something that Miami-Dade County has the ability to do. And also to Commissioner Bott's suggestion that some sort of public notice be given. I think that is an extremely important safety issue for unsuspecting people. I think that if there's a way to eliminate these, I guess, apartment hotels or hostels, all of that kind of thing, I think that it would just do our city a world of good. I know that right now, that next door, I'm looking at what's happened here is at the Monte Carlo, somebody has come in and sublet about 30 apartments. There is no oversight at all. They just have a electronic key and walk in. So there's only somebody that monitors the public common areas, and that's not safe either. Because you don't know, it's just very uncomfortable. And this whole thing, I've gone on the hotel motel program on the Miami-Dade Homeless Trust site, and there's nothing listed for the Bikini Hostel. And if there are oversight, if there is a law, if there are oversight measures that are in place that prevent people being, there's supposed to be a continuum of care. And I'm not quite sure how placing them in a beer garden hostel bar open to the public fits that criteria. And I know that you all have done everything that you can do, that it's completely frustrating. You know, it's dangerous to them, it's dangerous to us, and I'm just, anything that you can do, I would really appreciate y'all looking into it.
Thank you, Elizabeth. You know, I think the point raised by Commissioner Bond is a very good point. I think if you're going to be renting at a facility and that facility is under contract with anyone in the continuum of care, then it should be noticed. It should be noticed to the individuals that are looking to stay there for a night or two or a month. Hey, listen, you know, there should be a notice on the booking page. There should be a notice, and when you get there should be a notice. People should have the right. Not everyone might want to. There are people who are more sensitive towards the homeless, who are more empathetic, and there are people who, even though they might be empathetic and caring, just choose as part of their vacation not to have to deal with it. And we understand what those social ailments are. But that doesn't mean I want to have to share a room with someone that is suffering with these social ailments, no matter the amount of empathy, no matter the amount of care, no matter how good-hearted someone may be. They just may not want to share a room, a common facility, a bathroom with someone that is in this situation. So, Mr. Attorney, as we prepare for this item to come back, I think at the very minimum, I think the signage, notice, disclosure, I think that's something that is so reasonable. I think, I don't know why we wouldn't.
And all I'm saying is we would just want to look at it in light of the state preemption.
Of course.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Let's say the state does preempt us. No, but let's say, no, it's something different. We can't require the entity from disclosing it, but we can put a sign on the public right-of-ways saying this facility houses, you know, individuals in the continuum of care. Because it's only fair, if I'm gonna be staying in a place, you know, like someone, I feel we have had residents who, not residents, we have had visitors who have been trapped, whose vacations have been ruined, whose money has been stolen in a way because they went somewhere, they didn't know, they paid for something, and now they were left with nowhere to go. So let's think about that. All right? Anything else? No? All right. With that, it's 6 o'clock, and we have exhausted our time. But Commissioner Bond, thank you so much for your participation. To our staff, to David Martinez, Tom Mooney, to Nick Kalergis, and to the members of the public who participated. Thank you. Have a good night.